I'm Grant, 41, a mechanic from Indiana, and for most of my life, my name was just a pause between my sister's sentences. She probably still has Mom's old bills in that box, Chloe laughed, and Dad added, he does like to hold on to grudges. Thing is, I'd been paying their bills for years, quietly, monthly, without a word of thanks. That day I left the unopened box on their kitchen counter and didn't tell anyone where I was going. If this sounds familiar, tell me where you're listening from tonight. My parents always chose my sister's opinion, and blamed me, even when I wasn't in the room. So I decided. I hadn't stood in that driveway since Christmas of 2019. Chloe had just looked at me with that half smile of hers and said, "Don't make things harder than they are." I remember staring at the wreath on the door, thinking it looked more like a target. Then I left. Never came back. Until now. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the late autumn light, already dimming by 4:30. Maybe it was the fact that nothing had changed. Same faded shutters, same cracked walkway, same scent of pine mulch from the front garden beds, like the place was holding its breath for someone else's story. I stood there with a cardboard box under my arm. Plain, unmarked, not heavy but filled with weight. The label I'd once scrawled in blue ink had long since faded. Cabin keys, docks, utilities. It had sat in my apartment closet for years. Nobody ever called to ask for it back. Inside, my parents were talking. I could hear them through the screen door. Light chatter, silverware against plates. Chloe's voice was the clearest. I stepped in without knocking. Mom looked up first. Her smile was brittle, like a cracker that breaks before you bite. "Oh, Grant, this is unexpected." "Dinner time," Dad said flatly, not looking up from his plate. Chloe raised her eyebrows like I was the one making a scene. "Well, look who decided to drop by." I walked in, set the box gently on the edge of the kitchen counter, and said nothing. "I found this while clearing out storage," I offered, motioning to the box. "Figured it belonged here." Nobody moved. Chloe took a sip of her wine. "You kept that thing all these years?" she asked. "You really are a time capsule." Dad chuckled, the kind of low, dismissive laugh I remembered from when I used to suggest anything at all. "Probably still has Mom's old bills in there," Chloe added, grinning. "He does like to hold on to grudges," Dad said without missing a beat. I stared at them. The room felt tight even though it hadn't changed. Same faded wallpaper, same humming fridge. I looked at my mother. She was already halfway to getting up to clear the table, avoiding eye contact. I stood up. "No," I said. "I hold on to responsibility, because none of you ever do." The silence was thick and instant. Even Chloe didn't have a quip ready. I let the box sit there, unopened, right where I placed it. I didn't wait for them to say anything more. I walked out the front door, letting the screen door slam behind me like punctuation. Outside, the air was colder now. The wind had picked up, carrying that mix of dry leaves and burning firewood from a nearby chimney. The trees were nearly bare, their limbs like outstretched fingers trying to grab whatever was left. I didn't tell them where I was going. Maybe because I didn't know, maybe because it wasn't their business anymore. For a long time, I thought family meant being included. Now I think it means being remembered for the right reasons. And sometimes, the only way to be remembered is to walk out holding the truth in silence. The house had settled. Everything creaked now, including me. It was almost dark by the time I found myself walking the side yard. I hadn't planned to stay long. Just long enough to drop off the box and pretend like it made a difference. But my feet wandered toward the back of the house, to the old entrance by the garage, where I used to sneak in after curfew, The wind had picked up, dry leaves brushing against the siding like whispers from old arguments. A shutter near the upstairs bathroom window banged loose against the wall, one hinge broken, the paint around it blistered and flaking. Nothing had been fixed. Nothing had changed. The back porch light still flickered weakly, just like it did 15 years ago. I remember replacing that bulb twice and my dad barking, "You didn't screw it in tight enough." Funny thing was, it was never the bulb. The wiring had always been shot. But fixing the wiring meant admitting there was a problem, and in this house, that was a bigger sin than the problem itself. I stopped by the old concrete steps leading to the mudroom door. A piece had chipped off one corner. Frost damage, most likely. It caught my toe and I stumbled slightly. The cement was cold and jagged, like the tone in Dad's voice on long weekends. Then I saw it. The crack in the doorframe. Still there. It ran diagonally from the lower hinge to the lock plate. I'd done that. Senior year. Thanksgiving break. Chloe had made some backhanded comment about me settling for oil and dirt instead of doing something meaningful. I slammed the door behind me so hard, the wood split. No one ever fixed it, just like no one fixed what she said. Back then, Mom just shook her head. Dad turned the TV volume up. But Grandpa, he was in the kitchen doorway, leaning on his cane. He looked at the crack, then at me, and said softly, "That frame will hold longer than any of them will." I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I do now. I ran my hand along the crack. The paint had darkened over the years, but the wood still held the memory. I wondered if they ever even saw it. Or if, like most things about me, it simply became part of the wallpaper they ignored. The garage door groaned as I opened it. Dust floated through the air like little ghosts of plans abandoned. I stepped inside and spotted something behind the rake and a folded beach chair. An old garden hoe. Mine. The wooden handle was cracked, the metal rusting but intact. I had bought it with my own money one summer when I thought landscaping might help me save for trade school. I used it for 3 months. Then Chloe's dance recital tour began, and all funds, all plans were redirected. They didn't throw it away. They just left it to rot in the shadows. Forgotten, but not gone. Like me. I stood there a while longer, breathing in the scent of gasoline and dried grass clippings. A mouse darted across the floor and disappeared into the corner where Dad kept his old trophies. Still polished. Still displayed. The irony didn't escape me. I took one last look around and pulled out my car keys. I wasn't going to sleep here tonight. Not because the house was cold, or the sheets would smell like dust, but because there's something lonelier than being alone. It's sitting in a place that once called itself home, and realizing it never meant it. So I left. I got in the car, turned the engine over, and backed out slowly. The house stood there like an old photograph, pretty from a distance, but grainy up close. I turned toward the cabin. No one knew I was going. No one asked. Some families don't throw you out. They just keep shrinking the space you're allowed to take up, until you leave on your own. The cabin smelled like damp pine and old coffee. Like it had been waiting for me, but wasn't sure why. It was darker in the woods than I remembered. The trees felt taller somehow, their limbs twisting against the twilight sky like they were guarding something. I pulled into the gravel driveway, headlights cutting across a rusted shovel propped up against the deck steps. Same shovel we used to dig out the fire pit, summer of 2004. The handle had split, but no one threw it away. We just stopped using it. I grabbed the box from the passenger seat, the same one I'd dropped off at the house, then picked right back up without a word. Cabin keys, docks, utilities, faded label, familiar contents. The lock clicked open with a stubborn groan, like the cabin had grown stiff with age, too. Inside, it was different. Same bones, same walls, but different. The plaid couch was still there, but the cushions had been replaced. Floral now. The wood-burning stove still squatted in the corner, but the logs next to it were neatly stacked in a way that didn't feel like me. The coasters on the coffee table were new. Decorative, gold-rimmed. Chloe. I dropped the box onto the dining table. Dust puffed up in the lamplight like the place exhaled at my arrival. The silence was deep, broken only by the occasional moan of the wind pressing against the windows. I moved through the cabin slowly, half expecting to see my younger self coming around the corner with a hammer in hand. I remembered building the shelves with Dad. I was 14, maybe 15. We didn't talk much, just passed screws and measurements between us like it was enough. That was one of the only afternoons I can recall where we didn't argue, or worse, ignore each other. The shelves were still there, but someone had rearranged the books, self-help titles, a candle labeled Morning Dew. I found my phone buzzing in my jacket pocket. Voicemail. Hey Grant, so I heard you might be heading to the cabin. That's fine. I mean, just don't mess up the kitchen, okay? I have guests coming next weekend and I already booked the cleaning lady, just don't make it weird. I stared at the screen like it had insulted me personally. Guests? Cleaning lady? I opened a drawer in the side table, the one we used to store spare keys and old restaurant menus from nearby diners. There it was, an Airbnb receipt, Chloe's name, cleaning fee, date, 2 weeks ago. They hadn't just borrowed the place, they'd rented it, for profit. Without telling me, without asking. I sat down slowly, the floral cushions resisting my weight like they knew I didn't belong anymore. My fingers hovered over the phone, then tapped twice. Delete voicemail. There was a time I would have called back, angry, wounded, trying to make a point they'd never hear. But this time, I just wanted quiet. I leaned back, listening to the crack of the wood settling in the rafters, the soft hum of wind past the eaves. This was the only place that ever felt like mine, and even that had been rearranged while I wasn't looking. They didn't steal the cabin. They just forgot it was mine too. I relocked the front door. Then I sat in the armchair, my chair still faintly indented from 1,000 nights of reading, sulking, dreaming, and I closed my eyes. The cabin didn't speak, but it didn't blame me either. You ever show up to your own family's gathering and realize you're just background noise? That's how it felt walking up the driveway that Sunday. Early Thanksgiving, Chloe called it. Said it was easier to get everyone together before prices went up and airports got messy. The irony was, no one asked if I could make it. The assumption was just that I'd be there. Or not. Made no difference, really. The crisp air had a bite to it, but the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon. Something floated out through the kitchen window like a trick. The house looked the same as always, white siding in need of power washing, wreath on the door a little too early for the season, and Chloe's SUV parked just slightly askew, like it owned the place. Inside, the table was already set. Cloth napkins folded into triangles, candles unlit but waiting. And place cards, because apparently, we're that kind of family now. My name was there, at the far end of the table, next to the window with the draft. Spelled Greg. No one noticed me reading it. Chloe swept in with a tray of deviled eggs like she was hosting a gala. "Hey, there you are," she said, brushing past me to place the tray. "Didn't think you'd show, honestly." "Yeah," I said. "Me neither." Uncle Dean was on his second glass of wine before anyone sat down. Aunt Carol asked about my car, then shifted the conversation to Jake's new tech startup before I could finish answering. My father nodded at me once, just enough to check the box, and my mother asked if I needed a sweater, as if I were still 10. Chloe had organized everything. She stood up mid-meal to announce, "So, quick update. I've decided I'll manage the cabin year-round now. The calendar's already filling up for December, and I talked to a property manager near Bloomington." Susan clapped. "That's wonderful, honey." No one looked at me. I set my fork down. Not hard, just deliberately. Chloe caught the motion, smiled like a cat. "We all know Grant's not the Thanksgiving type anyway." There it was. The twist of the knife wrapped in a joke, a few laughs. My father even smirked. I stood, glass in hand. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't clear my throat. I just said, "To family. The ones who remember you, and the ones who only remember your faults." The room stilled. The kind of silence that doesn't fall. It lands. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the cabin key, walked around the table, past the sweet potatoes and the cranberry mold, and placed it beside Chloe's wine glass. She blinked. "What's this?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. I turned, walked toward the door. My mother called after me. "Grant, wait, don't." But her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Outside, the cold hit me clean. Real. The key had felt heavy all week, not because of what it unlocked, but because of what it represented. Memory, effort, history, things nobody else seemed to carry. Sometimes handing over the key is the loudest way to say, "This isn't home anymore." Chloe never lied. She just let the silence speak for her. And for years, it said enough to ruin me. It was late. The kind of late where time feels suspended, where the only sounds are the rain pattering against the cabin's tin roof and the occasional creak of wood shifting with the wind. I sat on the porch, cloaked in the dark, half wrapped in an old army blanket I'd found in the closet. I hadn't planned on being there when they showed up. Chloe had texted earlier, coming by with Mom to check cabin locks before winter. Like it was hers, like I was the intruder. I could have driven off. But I didn't. I turned off all the inside lights and waited. I wanted to hear them, not see them. They pulled up around 8. Susan's voice came first, always a little too cheerful when she's trying to mask discomfort. "It's just lovely out here," she said, though the rain had already soaked the hem of her jeans. They stepped inside, unaware I was just feet away on the porch. The door creaked open. The cabin swallowed them. I heard Chloe's boots on the wooden floor. Then the soft rustle of bags being set down, cabinet doors creaking open, and her voice floating out from the kitchen. Susan said, "Chloe, again, thank you for helping with the cabin expenses. It means so much to your father and me." There was a pause. A long one. Then Chloe answered, "Don't dig too deep, Mom. It just gets messy." That's her style, not outright denial, just enough fog to keep the picture blurry. The bottle in my hand rattled. Half full with my father's arthritis meds. $280 a refill. Automatically charged to my account because they never updated the pharmacy records. Or maybe they never cared to. Either way, I never said anything. Until now, no one asked. Susan's voice lowered. "You never make things about yourself. That's what makes you so different from your brother." I felt something twist under my ribs. Not anger, exactly. Not yet. Just the slow churn of decades catching up. The light from the kitchen flickered. A shadow moved past the window. Probably Chloe checking the fridge or counting mugs, as if inventory made the place hers. She never told them I was the one who kept the water running through winter, or that I paid the back taxes that one year Dad forgot to file. She never corrected them when they assumed the electricity was magically free. And I let her have that silence for too long. Because for a while, I thought maybe that was peace. Maybe if I didn't speak, no one would blame me. But silence doesn't buy groceries. It doesn't fix the heater or pay for prescriptions. Chloe didn't need to lie. She just let their love for her do the talking. And that love? It never once paused to fact-check. Inside, I heard Susan yawn. "Your father's been so tired lately. Poor thing, he naps after dinner now." I rolled the bottle in my hand again, cap clicking faintly. I'd refilled it 3 times this year. No one ever noticed it came in my name. Rain started coming down harder, wind pushing droplets onto the porch tiles. I didn't move. Inside, the voices faded. A bedroom door closed. Silence wrapped around the cabin like insulation. I whispered, barely audible even to myself. Silence isn't kindness, it's cover. I sat there a while longer, letting that truth settle. Then I stood, opened the door quietly, and stepped inside. Not to argue, not yet. Just to be in the same space, no longer invisible. There's a point when silence stops being strength and starts being surrender. I was done surrendering. The pot roast was going cold. Steam still curled from the mashed potatoes, but nobody touched a thing. Not yet. The cabin's dining table, nicked with years of elbows and hot plates, sat heavier than usual that Sunday noon. It wasn't just the food or the family. It was what we weren't saying. I used to love this table. I was 14 the first time I tried to have a real opinion at it. I'd asked Russell why he never sat through my school plays like he did for Chloe's piano recitals. He'd looked at me like I'd insulted the drywall. Mom snapped, "That's not appropriate dinner talk." Chloe giggled into her milk. I never tried again. Until now. Chloe leaned forward, bright and polished like always, and said, "So, I've been talking with a couple folks from the community center. There's a grant available for art programming, if I can show local commitment. I thought maybe we sell that back lot behind the cabin." She said it like it was obvious, like it wasn't a chunk of earth that still held my mother's ashes beneath a cluster of sugar maples. I looked up. "That's Mom's half-acre." The table stiffened. Susan blinked once, then said gently, too gently, "Don't make this about you, Grant." Chloe sipped her water. Uncle Dean scratched at his chin. Russell didn't look up. I didn't recognize my own voice when I said it next. "It's not about me. It's about pretending nothing matters unless you say it does." They blinked at me like I was speaking Greek. "I've paid for every property tax notice that came in late," I continued, my tone flat. "I covered the furnace replacement last winter because no one else remembered it was dying. I paid for Dad's hip rehab copay. And Chloe, how exactly were you planning to ask me to sell land that isn't yours to offer?" Chloe's smile thinned. "You've always been dramatic, Grant." I didn't flinch this time. The room held its breath. Wind outside tapped the window frame. My knuckles tightened against the wood of my chair. Then, slowly, I stood. "I'm not asking for a medal," I said, voice shaking but steady. "I just want the truth to have a seat at this table." And then I did something I hadn't done since high school. I slammed my palm flat on the table. The plates rattled. Uncle Dean jumped slightly. Chloe's fork clattered. "I'm not invisible," I said. "You just got used to not looking." Russell finally looked up. His jaw was set. Cold eyes. That same stare he used when I told him I wanted to work with engines instead of going to college for finance. He said, "You want respect? Learn to talk like a man." The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence they broke. That was his way. When he couldn't dismiss you quietly, he'd belittle you loudly. I took a breath, feeling 1,000 unspoken dinners press into my lungs. Then I sat back down. Calm, but changed. No one touched the roast. It smelled like rosemary and endings. That night, I lay in the cabin's loft listening to the creak of the floorboards beneath my cot. "They asked me to speak up for years," I whispered into the dark. "But they only ever listened to the echo of Chloe's voice." I didn't stop supporting them out of anger. I stopped out of self-respect. The soft hum of late-night jazz trickled from my old radio, filling the quiet of my apartment like a warm hand on the back of the neck. Landon was curled up on the far end of the couch, eyes half closed, wrapped in my old college sweatshirt, like he'd owned it all his life. The clock blinked past midnight. I should have been asleep, but my phone screen glowed in the dark like it had something to confess. My banking app showed the same thing it had for the last 3 years. Monthly transfer, $450, to Russell and Susan Hawthorne. Next payment scheduled 3 days from now. I tapped the line. The details opened like a scar being re-examined, recurring since 2020. Right after Chloe said she just needed time to get back on her feet. Right after Dad couldn't work the hours anymore. Right after I said yes, without being asked. Landon looked up. You okay? I showed him the screen. 3 years. Automatic. I never even asked them if they needed it after the first 6 months. He sat up. They ever thank you? I shook my head. Landon leaned forward. What if you gave yourself even half the grace you give them? That sentence landed like a soft meteor, silent on the outside, but it shifted something deep. I tapped Edit Transfer. Then Cancel Recurring Payment. Confirm? Yes. The screen blinked. The future reloaded. I went back to the savings page. It looked the same, just numbers. But something about it felt different, like the start of a different kind of life. Not rich, but unburdened. The phone buzzed. Dad. Incoming call, of course. I answered. Yeah? His voice was gruff, a little hoarse. You changed something with the bank? I got a notice. Says Chloe's payment didn't go through? I sat up straighter. She never sent it, I said. That was me, until now. A pause. You? Yeah. I've been covering both of you for 3 years. Another silence, deeper this time. Then, why stop now? I could have said a lot. Could have listed the ignored phone calls, the cold shoulders, the dinner where they erased me in real time. But I didn't. Instead, I said, because I finally remembered who the money belongs to. His breath caught, or maybe I imagined that. He muttered something like, suit yourself, and hung up. No goodbye. I stared at the blank screen for a second, then turned the phone face down. Landon got up, crossed the room without a word, and placed a glass of water beside me. He didn't ask anything, just sat. Close enough for the silence to feel like a home, not a punishment. That night, sleep came like it used to when I was a kid, full and honest, no unpaid debts waiting in the dark. The next morning the air was still crisp, the city already humming outside my window. I slipped on the same scuffed boots I'd worn since the timing belt on my old truck gave out. Then I stopped, turned back, pulled open the closet, and for the first time in 4 years, I picked out a new pair of shoes. Leather, size 10, wide fit, no guilt. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks out of Payless with a receipt, and your name spelled right on the box. When the money dried up, the truth flooded in. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and tension. Stacks of unopened envelopes cluttered the sideboard. An unpaid water bill curled at the edges, soft with humidity. The faucet had started dripping again. Slow and deliberate, like it was timing the silence. Chloe stood by the fridge, arms folded, phone pressed to her ear like it owed her a favor. No, I don't understand why it bounced, she said, her voice a little too loud. It's supposed to clear on the first. It always clears on the first. Susan sat at the table, stirring lukewarm tea that had long since stopped steaming. Maybe there's a mistake, she mumbled. Uncle Dean popped his head in, took one look at the grim faces, and made a quick retreat. I'll, be out back, he muttered. Russell flipped through a stack of paper marked PASTDUE in red font. He didn't look up. "So you're telling me none of the cleaning's been paid for?" Chloe finally ended the call and tossed her phone onto the counter. "I told you, it's not my fault. The system says the payment didn't go through." Russell's brow furrowed. "Whose payment?" Chloe blinked, just for a second. A blink that said more than she meant to. "I mean, I thought Grant was handling the automatic stuff." Susan straightened. "I thought you were managing the account." "No," Chloe snapped. "I was managing the listings, the messages, the reviews. He was always the one who said not to worry about the rest." "You never paid a single thing?" Russell asked. Chloe crossed her arms tighter. "He never asked me to." Susan's voice, usually trembling, turned flat. "He also never asked for credit, but we gave it to you anyway." Silence, except for the faucet. Drip, drip. Russell stood slowly, looking older than Grant had ever remembered him. "So let me get this straight," he said. "Grant was the one paying for the insurance, the septic, the snow clearing. The propane," Susan added. "The trash service. The locksmith when we lost the key last year." "And you just let him," Russell said, his voice cold, "while you strutted around acting like the host." Chloe's face flushed. "That's not fair." "No," Susan said quietly. "It's just accurate." Russell turned toward the window, exhaling hard through his nose. "I'm calling him." Susan reached out. "Maybe we should wait." But he was already dialing. Voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Then his inbox chimed. Chloe saw it first. "What's that?" Russell opened the laptop. His fingers were slow, like he already knew the shape of what was coming. There it was. Subject: 3 years, my turn, from Grant Hawthorne. Susan's hand flew to her mouth. Oh no. They read in silence. The email wasn't long. It wasn't angry. It was clinical. Precise. Bullet points even. $16,200 in maintenance since 2020, $2,100 in property tax carryovers, $4,800 in unpaid utilities and service fees, $6,000 in medical co-pays for Russell's post-op care. Total, $29,100. I don't expect repayment, but I expect recognition. And going forward, I expect you to manage your own house. No threats, no insults, just a line at the end. Sometimes silence says enough. But not anymore. Russell scrolled back up and read it again. Then again. Chloe backed away from the counter. He never said anything. No, Susan whispered, because we never gave him the space to. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the dead leaves in the gutters. A branch scraped the window like fingernails, dragging across old regrets. Susan sat back down at the table. Her hand trembled as she lifted the teacup again. What did we do? She whispered. No one answered. Sometimes all it takes to expose a hollow house is to stop holding it up. After the email, no one called me, but suddenly everyone wanted to talk about me. At least that's what silence does. It shifts the weight. You send the truth out like a flare, and what comes back isn't a call or a text. It's air that gets heavier. Denser. People don't reply, but they sure do read. I was in the garage that week, alone. The kind of alone that buzzes, not peaceful, just unfinished. A low hum rolled from the radio in the corner, an AM station that still played 70s classics. Earth, Wind and Fire, The Temptations, Smokey Robinson drifting through the warm dust of motor oil and brake pads. I'd just finished tightening a fan belt on a Buick that smelled like cheap cigars and old grief. I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned back against the counter. Still no call. Landon peeked in from the side door, holding 2 coffees. They say silence is golden, he said, handing me one. But I've seen the way you twitch every time your phone lights up. I didn't deny it. Nothing yet, I said. Just a text from Chloe. One line. He raised an eyebrow. What did it say? I took a breath. She wrote, "We didn't know. That's it." He took a sip of his coffee and made a face. Weak. Yeah. She mean it. Does it matter? That's the thing about apologies. The good ones carry weight. The bad ones float. This one felt like helium, just enough to look like something, but empty when you hold it. The radio crackled, and a familiar voice came on. The late-night host I'd been listening to for years, always there when sleep wasn't. Some families, she said, soft and sure, apologize without ever saying sorry, and some folks hear that non-apology loud and clear. Landon glanced at me. You paying her? I half smiled. Feels like she's reading my email drafts. You writing one again? I nodded. Tried to write one to myself this time. Figured if no one's answering, maybe I should answer myself. He didn't laugh. He just nodded. Slow. Respectfully. I pulled out my phone. I had half a page in the Notes app already. You did what you could. You gave and you didn't brag. You swallowed more than anyone knew, and when you finally said something, they acted like it came out of nowhere. But you were always there, always. I stared at it. Then I pressed delete. All of it. Gone. Why? Landon asked. I don't want it to be on the page, I said. I want it out of me. I opened the voice memo app. Hit record. For years, I began, I traded peace for approval. Bit my tongue, paid the bills, nodded through the blame. I thought if I stayed useful, I'd be safe. I thought if I didn't fight, I'd be kept. I'm done negotiating with ghosts. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done pretending silence isn't a kind of answer. I saved the file, labeled it, "Not for them." Landon placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and warm. Good. That night, as the garage lights flickered into the blue of evening, I closed up early. The last car was done. The floor swept. Tools lined up like soldiers. I pulled the chain to shut the front gate. That's when I saw her. Chloe, standing on the sidewalk in her wool coat, hands jammed into the pockets. No umbrella, even though a slow drizzle had started. Her hair was damp at the edges. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there like a question mark. I didn't move, not yet. Some silences are empty. Some are full of everything that should have been said. The cabin looked different in the snow, softer, like a wound that had stopped bleeding. The pines bowed under white weight, and smoke from the chimney curled upward in slow spirals like someone praying quietly, but not for show. Inside, the heat struggled but did its best. I'd lit the stove an hour before she arrived. 2 mugs of coffee sat on the table, still steaming, though weak enough to taste more like boiled water with memory. Chloe stepped in quietly. No knocking. Same as always. She wore a thick parka, and those gloves with no fingertips. I watched her scan the room like she was trying to remember where everything used to be. You moved the bookshelf, she said. Yeah, I nodded. Needed light by the couch. She sat down across from me. No hugs, no eye contact at first, just the shuffle of her pulling her gloves off, then warming her hands on the mug like she needed something to do before words. I didn't know, she finally said. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't know what? Her voice cracked, just slightly. Didn't know how much you were covering. I knew. Something wasn't right. But I didn't ask, because I didn't want to owe you too. That one landed. I sat back, let it settle between us. Then we're even, I said, because I didn't want to resent you anymore either. She looked at me. Really looked, like she hadn't in years. Like she saw someone who wasn't just a default villain in our family's story. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she whispered. I know, I said. You just didn't stop it when it happened. The snow ticked softly against the cabin window. No one raised their voice. No one cried. But something in the air started to shift, just a little. I brought something, she said, reaching into her coat pocket. A folded piece of paper, slightly creased and damp at one edge. She slid it across the table. What's this? Notarized form, she said, to transfer half the cabin back to you. You always acted like it was yours, but I know. It actually was. Maybe still is. I didn't touch the paper, didn't unfold it. Instead, I asked, why now? She exhaled through her nose. Because it's the one thing we haven't ruined yet. I stared at the mug between my palms. It had a small crack in the handle, barely visible, still held together. I didn't sign. I just said, we'll see. She nodded once. That was it. No bargaining. No push. She stood, tugged her gloves back on, walked to the door, then paused. You know, she said, looking out into the snow, I always thought you liked being the outsider. Turns out you were just left there. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to forgive. But for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to forget either. Maybe the truest things we give each other aren't forgiveness or money. Maybe it's space. Before you fix something, you need to know what's broken. So I made a list. It was just after 5 when I sat down at the old table near the window. The sun was low, barely cutting through the frost that had gathered along the glass. Outside, kids were dragging sleds across brown patches of snow, half laughing, half complaining like winter owed them a better memory. Inside, it was quiet. Landon had left for work, and I told him I needed the apartment to myself. For once, I meant that in a good way. I cleared the table, moved the bowls, the keys, the empty water glass that had been sitting there for days. I pulled out a stack of old receipts from a drawer. Some were wrinkled. Some smelled faintly of the cabin, wood smoke and dust. Alongside them, I laid out 3 faded photos. Me at the cabin, Dad teaching me how to siphon gas, Chloe in her graduation gown. All frozen moments, framed by years that had warped around them. Then I picked up a pen. I wrote, at the top of the first page, things I was blamed for that weren't mine. And I started. The broken snowmobile. Chloe had borrowed it with her boyfriend the night before the storm, but I was the one Dad yelled at when it wouldn't start. The basement leak. It had been slow, years in the making, but the day the pipe burst, I was the only one who had time to notice. Chloe's lost college deposit. She said she mailed it late, but Mom called me to ask if I'd distracted her that week. The missing tools. I'd lent them to Uncle Dean. No one asked. They just pointed. I kept going. Some entries were longer. Some just had one word. Thanksgiving, 2016. By the time I reached the end of the page, the light had shifted in the apartment. Everything looked softer in twilight. Honest, almost. Then I turned the paper over. On a clean page, I wrote a second list. Things I never said. And under that, I missed Dad's laugh before it turned into sighs. I liked when Chloe snuck peanut butter cookies into my lunchbox in 7th grade. I wish Mom had held my hand at the hospital that night instead of looking away. I never wanted to be right. I just wanted to be included. This list felt different, like clearing a space, not marking a crime scene, like honesty without indictment. The pen stopped moving. I sat there a long while, staring at the lists. The first one made my jaw tighten. The second made my chest loosen. Then I stood, walked to the sink, and without ceremony burned the first one, held it with tongs over the stove, watched each complaint curl in on itself and vanish into smoke. I kept the second, folded it twice, placed it in a blank envelope. No return address, just the names, Susan and Russell. I sealed it, didn't reread it, didn't explain it. I walked it to the corner mailbox and let it go. I don't know if they'll open it, don't know if they'll understand it. But for the first time in years, I wasn't mailing out guilt. I was sending truth. Some debts aren't about money. They're about truth, left unspoken. Thanksgiving came again. Same table, one less chair. The Ellison house smelled like sage, store-bought pies and tension. Susan had been up since dawn, basting the turkey, fluffing the pillows on the couch no one would sit on, and folding napkins into triangles like she always did. But this year, the napkins were down one. They didn't say his name. Not when Uncle Dean arrived, arms full of wine and good intentions. Not when Cousin Jake slunk in late, already checking football scores. The food went in the oven. The table was set. And across from Chloe, where he'd always sat, was an empty chair. It wasn't pushed in. It wasn't filled. It was just there. Susan poured cider, smiling too hard. "Let's eat before it gets cold," she said, her voice cracking slightly. Chloe nodded and reached for the mashed potatoes, but her hand stalled halfway. Russell, already halfway through his first glass of wine, stared at the centerpiece. No one spoke. No one touched the chair. Uncle Dean cleared his throat. "So, Chloe, how's the art program?" She forced a smile. "We lost funding. Turns out, we miscalculated our budget." Dean blinked, unsure if that was a joke. Jake muttered something about his fantasy football lineup. The cranberry sauce wobbled silently on its dish. Then, Russell set down his fork. Not loudly, just enough for everyone to hear the sound. And he said, "Grant was right." The air shifted. Even the candles seemed to freeze mid-flicker. Susan blinked fast. "Russell, don't—" But he kept going. "We let him carry things. Things we didn't want to name, things we should have." Silence followed, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful. Then Chloe reached into her bag and pulled out a plain envelope, creased at the corners. "He sent this," she said. "No note. Just this." She opened it slowly, careful not to tear it, like it might break if she wasn't gentle enough. Her voice trembled slightly as she began to read. "What I wish I heard growing up. You don't have to agree with me to love me. You don't have to fix my choices, just trust that I live with them. I'm not difficult, I'm different, and that's okay. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I couldn't stay and stay whole. You don't have to fix the past to make peace with it. You just have to stop pretending it didn't hurt." Chloe's voice faltered at that last line. Jake looked away. Dean reached for his glass. And Russell, he stood. Slowly. No anger. No outburst. He walked into the kitchen, opened a beer from the fridge, and sat on the back porch. Alone. No coat, no words. Just cold air and the hum of November wind. Susan watched him go. Her lips tightened, then relaxed. She reached out and adjusted Grant's empty chair. Turned it slightly. Not toward the table, but toward the window. No one ate much after that. Later that night, Chloe lingered in the dining room. She gathered plates, wiped counters. Then she looked at the envelope again, folded it back, slipped it into her coat pocket. Before leaving, she walked past the chair one last time. Her fingers brushed the back of it, like she meant to straighten it, but didn't. And then she walked out into the cold. An empty chair isn't always absence. Sometimes it's a message. He left me a voicemail, just 6 words, but they hit harder than a sermon. I was under the hood of a '94 Ford, oil-streaked wrench in one hand, radio murmuring static between Smokey Robinson and the weather report. The snow had started to fall. Light, like it didn't quite believe winter had arrived. The phone buzzed in my back pocket. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. One new voicemail. I didn't check it right away. I finished tightening the bolts, wiped my hands on a rag, poured myself a stale cup of break room coffee. I stared at the steam for a long time before I pressed play. "Son, I was wrong, that's all. No name, no apology, no explanation." But it was his voice. It cracked halfway through the sentence, just enough for me to recognize something brittle in it, something real. Landon was leaning against the counter, flipping through a dog-eared copy of Car and Driver. He looked up when the message ended. "That's him." I nodded. He didn't press me, just said, "Maybe that's all it ever needed to be." I didn't respond, just slid the phone into my jacket pocket and let the quiet do the heavy lifting. After a while, I opened the bottom drawer of the old metal desk shoved against the wall. It squealed like it always did, protesting age and disuse. Inside, a sandwich bag of screws, a faded warranty form from 2011, and a small photo album wrapped in a grocery bag. I hadn't looked at it in years, maybe a decade. I sat down on the shop stool, cracked it open. The first picture was blurry. Me at 5, holding a wrench upside down, grinning like I'd discovered fire. Next, Russell, younger, in jeans and a sun-faded fishing vest. I was 10, maybe 11. We stood at the edge of Lake Monroe, both of us holding a line, both mid-laugh. It looked like someone had caught us between jokes, before all the years and silence and half-spoken expectations. There were no captions, no dates, just smiles. I flipped to the back. More photos. Me and Chloe in Halloween costumes, Mom holding a burnt pie at Thanksgiving, Grandpa's hand scribbled with grease while carving a Christmas ham. People didn't label those moments. We just lived them, then left them to fade. Landon came closer, looked over my shoulder. "You looked happy there." I nodded. "I think I was, for a while." "Want to call him back?" "I don't know." That was the truth. Not bitterness, not defiance, just not knowing. I stared at the picture again. Russell's eyes were squinting from sunlight or maybe joy. My arm was touching his, not intentionally, just the way you stand when you're not afraid to be close. I picked up the phone, scrolled to recent calls, pressed the number. It rang once, twice. I hit end before the third. Set the phone down like it was hot. Landon didn't say anything, just put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. We stood there a while, the heater in the garage kicking on with a thump, the snow tapping the window like it wanted to be let in. Later that night, I saved the voicemail, moved it to a protected folder in my phone labeled Truths I Needed Once. Didn't listen to it again, didn't need to. Sometimes love doesn't come back loud. It tiptoes in through voicemail. I didn't go back to argue. I went back to listen, and that made all the difference. The sun had barely broken the clouds when I pulled into the driveway. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it always had been. Or maybe the weight I used to carry here had made it feel larger, heavier. I knocked once. Didn't wait. Susan answered the door. Mom, I mean. But Susan felt more appropriate that morning, like we were two adults meeting halfway. She didn't cry, didn't scold, just stepped aside and said, "The kettle's on." Her sewing room was warmer than I remembered, soft with light, thick with the smell of lavender sachets and old carpet. The room hadn't changed. Same floral wallpaper peeling in one corner, same cluttered thread spools lined along the window. 1,000 colors waiting for use, She poured the tea. I didn't touch mine. For a long moment we just listened, to the clink of porcelain, the house settling around us, a cardinal tapping the glass outside. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. Worn at the edges. The ink had bled in one spot from a coffee spill. "I made a list," I said. She didn't look up. "Not to blame you, just to tell you what I never said." She nodded. "Go ahead." I unfolded it, cleared my throat. "I always liked your meatloaf, even when you burned the edges." She smiled faintly. "I stopped coming around, not because I was angry, but because I wanted you to ask why." She didn't blink, just said, "Because you were tired of earning your place." It hit me like a freight train, not the words, the fact that she knew. "I wanted to be chosen," I whispered. "Just once." She reached over, no grand gesture, just a quiet slide of her fingers across the armrest, and opened the top drawer of her sewing table. Inside was a folded cloth, edges fraying. She lifted it out gently, placed it on my lap. 2 names stitched in thread. Grant, Chloe. Equal size. Same color. "I started this when you were kids," she said. "Wanted to make something for Christmas, never finished. Life got in the way." I ran my hand over the letters. The G had a slight slant. The C was tighter. She'd done them by hand. No machine. "I guess," she said slowly, "I didn't realize how loud my silence could be." I looked up. "It echoed for years." "I'm still learning," she said. "Still late to things I should have known early." We sat there a long time. No more list, no more defenses. Just the 2 of us, in a room full of thread, finally trying to stitch something real. Outside, the cardinal flew off, the window pane fogged from the kettle's breath. Parents don't always get it right. But when they try, that's something worth holding on to. We didn't light it to stay warm. We lit it because we finally could. The air outside was cold enough to sting, but not enough to keep us apart. For once, we had all arrived at the cabin without being asked. Or forced. No holiday, no obligation. Just a quiet, unspoken need to see what would happen if we sat still in the same room. It was Chloe who brought the pie. Pumpkin, her usual. Store-bought, but no one mentioned it. Susan came with a thick photo album wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, like it needed to be protected from whatever weather we were still carrying inside ourselves. And Russell? He didn't say a word. But he came with kindling. The hearth hadn't been used since before the pandemic, maybe longer. Last time it saw fire, Mom was still calling me distant, and Dad hadn't yet started limping. But tonight, the hearth waited like it knew we'd come back eventually, even if it wasn't sure we deserved to. I laid the old iron poker across the mantel, a forgotten garden tool I'd found months ago rusting behind the shed. I didn't clean it, didn't sand it down. I wanted it to keep its scars. We all had ours, after all. No one gave a speech. No one poured wine or made a toast. The crackling logs did the talking for us. Susan opened the album. She didn't ask permission, just laid it on her lap, flipping pages slowly. Some photos were of me and Chloe at the lake, sunburned and sticky with popsicle smiles. Some were of Dad, back when he still had most of his hair. Russell leaned forward once to toss in another log. He grunted. That was the only sound he made for a full hour, until he stood up, brushed off his jeans, and cleared his throat. "The land," he said. "It stays with both of you. That's final." He looked at no one, but we all heard it. Chloe nodded. "Okay." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for more. I didn't ask for back pay or for the years. Some things, when given freely, mean more. The radio sat on the windowsill. I clicked it on. Static first, then a soft tune. an old jazz station my grandfather used to hum along with. No one asked me to change it. No one said it was outdated. We just listened. The fire crackled. Susan passed me a slice of pie and didn't say, "Thanks for coming." She just looked me in the eye, and that was enough. For the first time in years, no one tried to fix anything. And that fixed more than I expected. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Landon, you okay? I stared at the screen for a second longer than usual. Then I typed, "Not okay, but home." Maybe peace isn't resolution. Maybe it's simply choosing to stay in the same room. The box was still there, same corner. But this time I didn't bring it to return anything. I came to fill it. The attic hadn't changed much. Same dusty beams, same faint whiff of insulation and cedar. But the way I moved through it had. I didn't tread like an intruder. I didn't carry weight in my chest or fury in my palms. I just climbed the ladder and opened the hatch like I belonged. Because this time, I did. Sunlight filtered through the slats and landed right on the box, like it had been waiting. I sat cross-legged beside it, the floorboards groaning in familiar protest. The same way they had, under my feet when I was 15, and hiding from a house full of relatives arguing about who overcooked the turkey. Back then, the attic was escape. Now it was return. The box was still sturdy. Plain cardboard with faded corners. The same one I'd placed on the Ellison kitchen counter months ago, back when all I wanted was to make a point and get out. This time I opened it. No ceremony. No audience. Just me. And the quiet. I laid in the first thing. The stitched cloth Susan gave me, names side by side, thread worn in just the right places. Then came the list. Not the one I burned, but the one I kept. The one with what I never said. I didn't reread it, just folded it carefully and set it next to the cloth. The photo went in next. Dad and I, on the lake. His arm around my shoulder. Both of us smiling like we didn't know how short that season would be. I closed the lid halfway and sat back. Not to finish, just to pause. Because sometimes endings need space, too. The stairs creaked. I turned my head, but I didn't speak. I knew it was her. Chloe ducked under the low beam and stepped inside like she was afraid the walls might judge her. She held something small in her hand. I couldn't see it clearly until she knelt beside me. It was a toy truck. The blue one I'd buried in the backyard after she'd taken it without asking. "I dug it up when I was 8, she said, brushing dust from its rusted edge. "Kept it in my closet all this time, I don't know why." She didn't ask. She just placed it inside the box, and then, together, we folded the flaps down. No tape, no lock, just the weight of two people deciding quietly what was worth keeping. "I don't think we should store it," I said after a moment. "Let's not lock it away. Let's leave it here where it belongs." She looked at me, puzzled. "Open if needed," I added. We didn't say more. There was no need to. As we descended the attic stairs, the old radio sitting on the cabin kitchen counter started playing. Crackled static first, then melody, Sinatra. "Fly Me to the Moon," one of Dad's favorites, one of Mom's too. I didn't believe in signs. Still don't. But some songs hit you in a place words can't reach. I paused at the bottom step, letting the music find its way up the ladder and settle into the attic, where that box, our box, rested. Not closed, just waiting. Some endings don't need full stops, just a quiet place to rest the sentence. You know, it took me most of my life to understand this. Sometimes, the things we hold on to, like pride, silence, or the need to be right, don't protect us. They just keep us from healing. Families are messy. They forget, they fail, they love poorly, but they're also made of people who, if given a little space and honesty, might just surprise you. I spent years trying to be seen, trying to earn my place. And in the end, I realized I had it all along. I just needed to stop asking for permission to claim it. So if you're sitting there tonight, thinking of someone you haven't called in a while, or remembering a conversation that never quite finished, maybe it's not too late. Maybe it's not about fixing everything. Maybe it's just about showing up, again, with a little more truth. As someone once told me, you don't need to rewrite the past to find peace. Just stop pretending it didn't hurt. If this story made you pause or reflect, drop a 1 in the comments. And hey, where are you watching from? Let me know your state. Got a different take? I'd love to hear it. Let's talk below. And if stories like this speak to you, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. Thanks for listening. And wherever you are tonight, I hope it feels a little more like home.